Well, first of all, thanks for coming out tonight. Appreciate everybody coming out and spending some time with us. My name is Mike Hacker. I'm an Azure App Dev Technical Specialist for Microsoft. I cover their state and local government team. I'm actually responsible for about half the country. So there's one other guy that covers the other half of the country for state and local government. So kept very busy, and I work with Brendan here quite a bit too. And you know, it's really nice to be here and be able to kind of talk to everybody and give you a little bit of a background on bots. Now, I've been with Microsoft for about 7 years, and before that I was a Microsoft practice manager for a local consulting company. It's actually a global consulting company, but they're local practice. And so pretty much for 30 years I've been doing software development of some sort and lots of stuff. And God, that sounds like a long time, doesn't it? God, I'm getting old. And what I find interesting is that bots is one of the things that has always kind of been there but never been good. And we can go all the way back to, I think it was like 1966 when the first bot called Eliza, I think is what it was called, came out. And basically the whole idea was can we build something programmatically that if a person typed to it, they think that there's a person on the other end of it. And that's what Eliza kind of did. And it was doing a bunch of if-then statements. It was very, very basic. Used a little bit of kind of psychology thinking to kind of trick people into believing that there might be somebody on the other side of it. But in general, bots have been very, very basic. And the reason why is because they're very complicated. Trying to understand language is difficult. And you understand Lewis, so that's going to be one of the things we'll be talking a little bit about. But you know, understanding language is very difficult. And especially when we're talking about multiple languages. You know, we're not just talking about English. You know, there's lots of languages in the world that we have to deal with, and even here in the United States. So, you know, how do we build bots that can understand the natural language of the speaker, no matter what language it is that they want to speak in? And bots also, you know, need to be able to not only interact with the natural language, but also, you know, spoken and text as language, but also think about like image and video. Maybe that's another way that you could communicate to a bot what your intent is or something that you're trying to accomplish. So building bots is difficult, or has been difficult. It's gotten a lot easier though recently, especially with cloud computing, and we've been able to do a lot with artificial intelligence. So when we go back to Eliza, there was no artificial intelligence. It was if-then statements. Now we've got artificial intelligence where the systems can start to learn and understand the intent of what you're saying and then get you to the right place within kind of your path of code so you can go and collect the right information and get it back to people. So that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today is what are the different things that we can do and tools that we can use to kind of make these bots a lot more intelligent, and how do we get started. So you know, when we talk about bots, I'm on the wrong screen, well that'll work. So, you know, first of all, what is a bot? So a bot is basically just an application. Instead of having a graphical user interface, it's going to be either text, speech, or image, usually, for communication. And let me switch this so I can actually see this a little bit easier on this way. There we go. Yeah, so you basically communicate in those 3 different kind of patterns. And like I said, a bot can be as simple as just text, you know, matching. So we say if someone sends you this message, then respond with this message. The problem of that is that it's not very smart. It's going to miss a lot of interactions. It's not going to understand people very well. You know, there's still good reasons to have bots that do that because it's kind of like a menu-driven system where you say, enter this word to do this, enter this word to do that. There's still reasons to do that. But that's not going to be the type of bot that you're going to want to put out into the general public for consumers to use. You know, Health and Human Services, or we talk about you know, the court systems, or you know, I deal a lot with like Department of Transportation and Secretary of State. You know, people want to ask, how do I renew my driver's license? You know, and there's many different ways that they could be asking that question, and so we need to be able to address those. So we want to make our bots a little more complex. Now, the components of a bot are quite simple. It's just an API. That's all it is. It's a RESTful API endpoint. So it takes data in, does some processing, sends data out through its interface. And so it's a well-defined interface, And that's all it is. So you can host a bot pretty much anywhere. You can host it on-prem, you can host it in the cloud, you can host it on what we call an app service plan, which is basically a website, or you can do things called serverless computing. So it's basically like a managed unit of work that you're going to run it still runs on a server, so it's less server really, that's not serverless. But you're basically paying for that unit of work to run, and that's it, instead of paying for the whole virtual machine. And so that's kind of the idea with a bot, is that you're going to build this bit of code that's going to have an entry point, it's going to do the processing, and send the results back. So it's very, very simple. We have something called the Bot Builder SDK that Microsoft has created, which helps make that a little bit easier. So it starts you off with a project that already has kind of a Visual Studio project with all the components that you need necessary, all the interfaces defined, all of that stuff, so you can get started right away building a bot. I'll give a demo of that here in just a bit, because it's quite straightforward and simple. And then you would start using other things. I mentioned Q&A Maker a couple times here. I'm going to demo that too. But Q&A Maker is a component that you can then have your bot call to process some of the input that you got to get some sort of response to give back. And we'll go through Q&A Maker, but in general, start with Bot Builder SDK, and you're going to build your bot as an API. And then, if you've got this API, how do we communicate to that API? How do we get our website, or how do we get other things to communicate to that, so you actually have a user interface for the person to interact with? And that's where we get into what we call the bot framework. So the bot framework is an interface between what we call a channel, or an endpoint, and your bot. So a channel would be Skype, or a web chat box, or text messaging. So all those are different ways that you can interact via text, maybe voice, or other ways to your bot. But you don't have to write all of that code in your bot. You don't have to know how to communicate to Facebook. You don't have to know how to communicate to text messaging. You just write your bot once, and then you go to the bot framework and you say, connect my bot to these different endpoints. And so that does all of that translation for you. So it allows you to focus as a developer just on building this business, the business logic and your bot to do what you need it to do, instead of focusing on all the plumbing. You know, the plumbing is not the fun stuff. So, you know, there's many different reasons to build bots, but what's probably the most important thing to think about is really understanding what your intent actually is for your bot. You know, this goes beyond technology. One of the biggest mistakes that I've seen customers do so far is that they say, I got to create a bot because everybody else is doing it, and they jump right into the code, and they totally forget about what the whole purpose of their bot is. And so if your bot doesn't have a purpose, it doesn't have an identity, it doesn't have a personality, people aren't going to use it because they're not going to know why does it even exist. It would be like going to a baker and saying, how do I renew my driver's license? The baker's going to look at you and go, why are you asking me that? You know, it's kind of the same idea with your bots. You have to have a good purpose for your bot. You need to think through it, and you need to make sure that you have a good personality. I mean, people will go so far as to say, you know what, my bot has this specific name, so I'm going to give it a name. I'm not going to give it a human name. I'm going to give it kind of a non-human name, because I don't want people to get the wrong impression that this is going to be able to answer all their questions like a person, a real human, but I want them to feel comfortable enough to be able to use it. They're going to maybe pick a color scheme. They're going to pick the way that the UI is going to work around the bot. How are we going to convey information to the user about what appropriate things can you ask this bot to be able to get the appropriate answers? Because what we see is that if you don't go through those steps before you even get to the bot and building the bot, if you just put it out in the real world, people are going to come and ask it questions with an expectation that it's going to be able to give them the right answer on pretty much anything. And when it doesn't, they're going to lose interest in the bot. They're going to feel that it's just not worth anything, and they'll just, you know, toss it off to the side, and they won't ever come back. So we have to find ways to make sure that the bots are engaging and really think through what that conversation is going to be. Now, some organizations aren't even ready to get to that point, to think about how, you know, what is this conversation going to be? They just know that they've got a problem, and the problem is, I've got a help desk that's overrun with phone calls, and I've got to figure out a way to offload that some other way. And they've historically been saying, well, just give them the link to our website. We've got our frequently asked questions out on the website. Send them out there. They can go read through all of those, and then if they have a question, they can come back to us. People aren't going to do that. They're still going to pick up the phone. They're going to call you and say, you tell me what's, so we got to make it easier. So that's where a bot that's based on frequently asked questions is actually a simple one to get started with, because it's something that you can kind of set the expectations pretty easily on a website, saying, if you've got a general question, ask here first, because you might be able to get it quicker. And people will be more likely to interact with it because they don't have to sit on hold for 20 minutes waiting for someone to come and answer the phone. And so we have something called Q&A Maker that allows you to really quickly build a database of frequently asked questions that uses something called LUIS in the background, which is a language and understanding and intent service. And what that does is it basically goes through and it looks at all your questions that you have in your FAQ. And it goes through and it classifies them, and it tries to understand what the intent of each of those questions are. Because when you ask a question, you might ask it differently. Same intent, but your language is going to be different. And so everybody's going to probably ask things slightly different. And if you try to just do a straight up pattern matching, saying, here's the text that they entered in, let me find that exact text in a question, it's not going to work. But if we can understand the intent of what the questions are, then when someone asks their question, we run it through and we understand the intent, and let's now see if we can match intents. And if we can match intents, then we can say, yep, we're really confident that this question that they asked matches this question in our FAQ, so here's the appropriate answer. So that's kind of the idea of Q&A makers, to help bridge that by using a bunch of artificial intelligence and using some language and linguistic processing in the cloud to be able to help do all of that matching. And it's really kind of interesting, because what happens with Q&A Maker is also just an API. So your bot receives a message. You pass that message to Q&A Maker. Q&A Maker is going to process it, going to send you back a response. Basically what Q&A Maker is going to send you back is a blob of JavaScript that basically says, here is the most likely answer, and here's how confident I am that I got it right. So it's going to give you a percentage of confidence. So that way, once it comes back to your bot code, you can say, well, if it's above a certain threshold, maybe if it's above an 85% confidence rating, I'm going to go ahead and give that response back to the user. Otherwise, I'm not going to give that response back because it's probably going to be wrong, or it might be wrong, and I don't want the person that's interacting with my bot to feel like I'm just throwing garbage at them. So instead of that, I might come back and say, I'm unable to help you with that question, but here's other places where you might go to get some assistance. Maybe give them a phone number, give them an email address, give them something else where they can contact someone to get that answer. The other nice thing about that is if you get back a low confidence score, let's log that someplace. Let's log that question so we can have somebody actually go out, answer that, add it to your FAQ, and reprocess it. So they've got a good feedback loop there. So that's kind of the idea of Q&A Maker, is to be able to log in. So you go to qamaker.ai, and this is free, by the way. So you can just log in, and what you can do then is either manually type in your frequently asked questions, so your question and answer pairs. You can point it at a website that already has frequently asked questions in it, and it will attempt to scrape them off there. Sometimes it does really good. Sometimes if you've got a lot of other stuff on there, like you mentioned jQuery and stuff, depending on how that jQuery is done, it may have a hard time pulling all that in there. But it'll attempt to do that. If you've got them in a PDF document, an Excel spreadsheet, a Word document, it'll read that in, and it will parse through that and give you a nice Q&A pairs that you'll be able to work with. So let me show you here real quick what that looks like. All right. Refresh this. Make sure it's refreshed. So if you come out to Q&A Maker AI, this is the website that you get. And so I've already logged in. Normally there'd be a sign in button there, but since I'm already logged in, it's got my name. And what you would do is you'd say, I want to create a new service. So it's very simple. You give it a name, whatever you want. It can be any name that you would like. Then you come down here and you see enter the URLs of the knowledge base. So all you got to do is drop in your public URL for your website, where your FAQ or as I say, product manual pages or whatever it happens to be. And you can add multiples here. One of the things that I'd recommend though is try to only create a service per category of thing that you're trying to answer. The reason why is if you have, well, a state government's a perfect example. There's so many departments, so many agencies that you can end up with a situation that if you add all of the FAQs for all the different departments and agencies in there, there's possibilities where there's questions that would kind of apply to both agencies, and it's not going to necessarily give you the right answers coming back and stuff. So we want to try to kind of categorize this a little bit here. If you don't have URLs, you can just go ahead and upload your file. And if you don't want to upload a file, you can start from scratch. You just hit create, and it's going to create you a blank one, and then you can just go ahead and type things in. So I've got one that's already created here. I'll just go to my services here. Actually, I've got two of them. I'm going to go to demo.1. And so once it's imported stuff, this is what it's going to look like. Question, answer. So question on the left, answer on the right. And these are all pulled in, actually, here, from the City of Chicago's parking tickets website. So I just put in, I know it's kind of hard to see there, but in this gray bar, that's the URL, says original source. So that's the URL for their frequently asked questions. Basically, I've got some questions, and I've got some answers that were pulled in by the site. If I want to manually add stuff, I can click on Add New Q&A Pair, and it'll just give me another row, just like a spreadsheet, and I can enter in the information. Once I've got all that in there, you hit Save and Retrain. What that does is it saves your information, but sends it to the Lewis model and the artificial intelligence backend, excuse me, to go through and do all that processing to do that intent processing. So it understands the intents of the questions that are being asked. So if I hit save here, it doesn't take very long for it to do all the processing. Now I only have, what do I got in here? I've only got a small handful, so like 30 different questions on this one. So it's pretty basic. So once you've done that, you're going to come over to the test. So test is going to give you something that looks like a chatbot. So basically what you can do is start asking questions down here, and it's going to then give responses from your FAQ. So now this gives you the ability to maybe go ahead and enter in a knowledge base of information, maybe set somebody else down in front of this, and say, go ahead and ask some questions, like you're a user of our site. What kind of questions would you ask? So I might say, how can I pay a ticket? And then it comes there, you may pay multiple tickets with one credit card, and so I can look at that answer and go, is that really the right answer for this? And if the answer is yes, then I don't do anything. If the answer is no, and I know this is really hard to see here, but right here there's some additional answers that came out of the FAQ. And I can say, no, it's really more appropriate that this one's the appropriate one. And that's going to help reinforce the learning of the AI model in the back end. How can I pay a ticket? That's one way to ask. But what would be other ways that I might ask that same question? So I could also, over here, type alternate text. So what are some other ways that I might think about asking that same question? And the more information I give the bot, the better it's going to be at actually answering the questions. So this allows me to come out here and really kind of try out some different ideas, questions and answers, before I even have opened up Visual Studio and done anything yet. Okay? So once I've gotten all of that done, I hit publish. And it's going to give me a summary saying, here is the summary of the changes that you've made to your model, and I'm going to say publish. Now we have a REST API endpoint published out on the internet that has my model all set. So the URL is that there. So westus.api.cognitive.microsoft.com/Q&A maker/v2.0. And then it's /knowledge base and then a GUID and generate answer. So what I do is I post a message to that URL. with just a JSON blob, JavaScript blob, that basically is question, colon, and then what your question is that you're passing it. And then it's going to process and return back to you the answer in JSON format. So it's going to basically say, here's the most likely response, the top response, and here's how confident I am that response is. So it's very simple, right? So now, what I do is when I go and actually build my real bot is an API itself. It's going to get the message coming in. Then I can decide if I want to send it to Q&A Maker. If I do, I send it to Q&A Maker, I get the results back, and then I can decide whether I want to show that message back to the user or not. So it's quite simple and quite easy to get started. Any questions on that? No?
So,
yeah.
On one of this screen you say, consider this thing, like when you are making the bot or something, like categorize or create.
Oh, yeah.
Can you explain it more?
Absolutely, yeah. So let me go back to that. So, because your questions and answers are usually for a specific purpose, because your FAQ document is usually maybe like for an agency or department, or it's for a specific type of thing that you're trying to convey information about. It's a good idea to kind of have them grouped together like that and not add a bunch of other FAQ categories to that same list. The reason why is, let's say that I've got, I'm trying to think of a couple examples. Maybe if I said something, well, DNR. So let's talk about DNR. So DNR, you might get like hunting permits and things like that. But you might also have another agency that deals with building permits. So if someone comes out to your bot and says, how do I get a permit? If you've got Q&As for both of those in that same bundle, guess what? It's not going to know which one. And you're going to randomly toss out either hunting or building, and it's no good. So what I usually recommend is try to have a knowledge base that's categorized based on a specific domain, a specific set of criteria or information, and not try to blend too much together into one, because then it gets confusing. And that's also a good practice for bots too, is that when you're building your bot, think about that dialogue process, and how is your bot going to understand what the person's talking about. If they just say, how do I get a permit? Is the bot on the DNR website? If so, great. It's probably hunting, fishing, whatever, and we can ask, do you want hunting, fishing, whatever permit. But if it's at the top of the state's website, then we got a problem because I don't know what kind of permit you're asking for. So maybe that type of conversation isn't what we should really, I don't want to say advertise, but kind of promote on the front of the state's webpage. Because maybe that would be more like a director kind of bot at the top of the state, where people could say, I want information about DNR, I want information about this or that, or Health and Human Services, and then it can redirect them to the right website or the page that might have another bot that can help them drill deeper into things. Or you could have one primary bot.
So that would just more so like match them with a location versus like an answer.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe it sends them to another website for additional help. So that's one way that can be done, and it also goes to who's building the bots too, because sometimes with states, agencies will want to do their own thing, and so they're going to want to build their own bot, and so trying to combine everything to one is not going to happen. But other states have central IT that says, guess what? We're going to control everything, and so we're going to build it. The agencies have input, but we're going to build one, and then the bot has what we call different dialogue paths. So the top path, if a person says, I want a permit, the bot's would just come back and say, well, before we can get to that point, how about you tell me, are you interested in these things? And maybe it gives them a collection of ideas. Do you is it a hunting permit? Is this? And then we can kind of head them off into a different direction. But as you can imagine, this kind of gets back to the whole thing about don't try to make your bot everything to everybody, because it can't be. Because you can't program every single path that someone could ever do. So you have to somehow have it more specialized. So to me, having an overarching bot for like a state, probably wouldn't work. But having it for a department or an agency, or for a specific website, maybe even a subsection of an agency, might make a lot of sense. to help get those answers done.
So to create a bot, like if you have all the data in Excel, for example, or not in FAQ website, you can start from there. You can upload it and then.
Mm-hmm. So what you could do is you could take that data, export it to Excel, and bring it in if it's already in like an FAQ type of question, answer, response. But if it's more line of business data that you're trying to reach in and get, then probably using Q&A Maker probably isn't the appropriate way. That's when we get to using Lewis that he was mentioning earlier. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment. We'll dive into that.
You said it's free, but are there limits?
There is. Yeah, so if you come out to the documentation here, API whoops, actually I went too far. API overview. FAQ. There we go. Yeah, so it is free. There are limits per subscription key, 10,000 transactions per month. 10 per minute is what it limits you to. Now they do have a way, let's see, where is that at? They don't have it listed here. There is on here, and I saw it, and it might be actually under the FAQ. There is a way to actually request an increase in that. So if you're doing something very interesting, then Microsoft's willing to open that up, and it's like 100,000 requests per month, and I can't remember, it was quite a bit per second that you could do. So it's definitely something if you're interested in doing this. And just so you know, Q&A Maker is in preview too, by the way. So it's not what we call a generally available service yet, so it doesn't have an SLA and all that stuff. So you got to remember that when you're building off of this. But it's a great way to get started, and Microsoft's really interested in getting feedback from customers on this. How helpful is this? Does it do what you want? Are there things that you'd like to see done differently? Because they're trying to understand, how best to position this along with the rest of the bot framework stuff that we've got. All right, so let's see. For the sake of time, let's jump over to this. All right. So how do we get started building our bot? Number one, Visual Studio 2017. Can you do other stuff? Yes, but it's going to be a lot harder to do. Because Visual Studio 2017 has all the tooling built into it to kind of make it easier to build the bots. We also have some templates that are out there. All you have to do is search for Visual Studio bot templates, and it's going to give you that same link. But basically what this is actually a project template that you can download that's already kind of starting your whole bot for you. But if you were to start without a template, we have a NuGet package. So it's the Microsoft.bot.builder package that installs all the additional components necessary to build a bot using the bot SDK. Node.js, we also used npm install to also pull down the same thing. So you can use pretty much any language that you want, because the bot framework, or the bot SDK is all about having kind of like a framework to make sure that you're following a very specific pattern for building your bots. So that way when you plug it into the bot framework, which connects you to all those endpoints, it's going to work. So that's kind of the whole point of that. And I'm going to show you a sample project. And then this here too, this bot builder overview, getting started, that's also a really good link there. By the way, I can give you guys these slides after this, so you have all the links. I don't know, what's the easiest way to do it?
I'll definitely put it on the meetup site. I can add it.
So that they can download it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Be able to connect
Okay,
with
so
them.
I'll do that. I'll get you the copy, and then you can put it out there.
Yeah.
So you have all those links. So you need the bot builder SDK. This is the easiest way to get started. Grab the Visual Studio template, open it up, and start building your bot. That way, it'll automatically bring in the NuGet package, and you'll be good to go. So there's some good documentation there that will kind of show that. Once you have your bot built and you're ready to kind of connect it to the different endpoints, you go out to dev.botframework.com and you're going to register your bot's endpoint. So basically, what's your bot's URL with it, and then tell it what services do you want to connect to. Do you want it a website? Do you want it Skype? Do you want it SMS? And then the bot framework is what's going to manage all of those endpoints from a communication perspective,